Today we have Jeff Snell, principal broker of ENLIGN Business Brokers, and the topic is negotiations. It's great to have you on the show, Jeff.
Thank you, Martin. It's great to be here.
Where do you start in negotiations?
Well, generally we start by identifying what the parties are looking for. If I don't know what you want and you don't know what I want, that's step number one to determine where we are.
You mean it's okay to ask them what they want, even your competition?
Absolutely. We have to put some lines in the sand.
They're not going to always tell you what they really want because they'll have their primary agenda and their secondary agenda. How do you address that?
Well, it depends on who you're negotiating with. Many times in my style of negotiation is open. I think we've all seen through Hollywood and past experiences, there are those that negotiate with a big curtain over reality. And in our practice and with our transactions, we found that that's not an effective way. It's time-consuming. It's viewed as deceitful, sometimes underhanded, and I think it's damaging to the overall process. But if we do find ourselves with someone that has two lines in the sand instead of one, then it's our job to peel back the layers and see what the truth really is and deal with those facts.
So you just ask, what do you want?
Well, we ask if we have to. Typically, you don't have to ask. As an example, in our primary practice, we represent business sellers, and we're negotiating with business buyers about the terms and conditions of those transactions. So it's obvious that the buyer wants to acquire the assets of that company, and I think it's intuitive that they want to do so at the best value that they can. So we're working to match up the seller's expectation of market value with the buyer's perception of value and their ability to find financing and fund the transaction.
Okay, once you know what they want, of course, making sure you know what you want is important too.
That's true. Again, using the analogy from our brokerage, what we want is the market value price, which was determined by evaluation, so it's defensible, can be explained, and it's something that both the buyer and seller can refer to. But oftentimes, the price is not the number one thing that the seller wants. The terms are very important. A wise business broker once told me, "I'll give you your price if you let me choose the terms." And that sounded very romantic on the front end, but the example that followed was, "I want $10 million for this company worth $100,000. And he said, "Deal, I'll pay you $1 a year."
I see.
So the terms are extremely important in the negotiating of any process. Another cliche that I appreciate, and I also believe cliches are cliches because they're true, is that what the large print giveth, the small print taketh away.
So read the small print is pretty important.
Read the small print, and if you have the ability, be the one who's paying the attorney fee who's drafting the small print too.
Good. All right, now you know what you want and what they want. One of the pieces in knowing what you want, I find, is either people undersell themselves because they go for what they'll settle for first, or they have insane, unrealistic objectives. What do you have to say about that?
I think that's true. Fortunately, we don't find that to be the majority of cases. But we talked earlier about those lines in the sand. One of the important parts of negotiating, participating in a negotiation, is knowing if there is a deal to be done or not. As an intermediary, it's our goal to find the overlap and complete a negotiation within that overlap so both parties can leave, as you stated, a win-win negotiation. That was a popular term several decades ago, and I think it's kind of gone out of vogue because it's perhaps overly simplistic in its approach. But at the end of the day, if both parties aren't satisfied with the transaction, the negotiator, the intermediary, truly hasn't done their job. What they've done is they've beaten up on one party to effect an outcome that they wanted. But that's not what negotiation is truly about. So determining what deal you're willing to do is the key part of negotiation, but equally important is determining what deal you're not willing to do. Because if you don't have a backstop, you can be pushed all the way into a situation that you would have been better off not starting in the first place.
All right, now you know what you want and what they want and somewhat the boundaries of this. What's the next step?
Well, I start with creating an atmosphere of mutual respect. respect with everybody involved in that process. And oftentimes there's people involved in that process that you're not aware are involved in the process. One easy example is a spouse. A negotiation for hiring a new employee, for example. That income stream, that person's lifestyle, how many hours they spend in the workplace is going to directly affect his family life. And you know who's going to be most interested in that? Typically the spouse, be it the husband or the wife. So it's important that you appreciate all the players and keep your mind open that there may in fact be more, and take their needs and wants and desires and influence into account during the process. Second, and equal to respect, is that no matter where a negotiation goes, no matter how quickly or unfortunately it may break down, you can never fall into a scorched earth mentality. And for those who haven't heard that phrase before, if you were to bring my 3-year-old into the room right now, if he didn't get what he wanted, half the time he practices scorched earth, which is in his case falling to the ground, screaming, and trying to bang on something and make noise. That just doesn't work. It doesn't work when you're 3, it doesn't work when you're 30, and it doesn't work when you're trying to negotiate a high-value transaction. So arm in arm with respect goes a mindset that no matter how bad things get, you're not going to blow it up and scorch the earth and walk away, because many times negotiations come back. In business brokerage, I like to say every deal falls off the table before it gets done. Statistically, that's not true, fortunately, but we end up many times ending a conference call or a face-to-face meeting with, it doesn't look like this is going to work. Let's go back and think about, digest what we've talked about, and be creative, which is leading to another point that I'd like to talk about, and see if there is a way that we can put this thing back together. But admit and acknowledge we don't have a deal right now, and that's okay.
That's an important piece. So you don't have to go for all or nothing. You can put it on pause.
We can put it on pause. We can shelve it. Sometimes it's shelved for a day. I had a deal that was as dead as I thought could possibly be dead, and my client called and said, we need to do this transaction. You need to bring it back to life. And I said, well, that will be the largest challenge that I've ever been given to this point, but I will do my best. And 2 weeks later, we had a closing that was fully funded. So it just goes to show that nothing is ever dead forever, so long as there's respect and no scorched earth.
You mentioned creativity. Would you talk about that?
Well, creativity, I think, is the most powerful tool in the negotiator's toolbox. Looking and being able to look at all the moving parts of a transaction or a negotiation is very important, because similarly to what's given in the large print is taken away in the small print, can be used fairly between the parties, where what's important to me is not necessarily important to you. So by moving these calipers and rotating the dials, we can massage deal structure and terms to a point where both parties are fully aware of everything going on. This is not trickery. We're not doing, card tricks or anything like that. But we're saying, Party A, would you be willing to do this if Party B is willing to do that? And we continue that process, bringing each other closer to the middle, and hopefully at some point where we have overlap and we can start talking about a definitive agreement. So an example in business brokerage, there are many issues. One of the most complex negotiations I think you could possibly have, unless you're an international diplomat. We have moving parts such as the asking price. Pretty simple. But we also have issues to do with taxation and an allocation table. And how we allocate assets versus goodwill affects how the seller is going to be taxed on that. Well, it's also affecting how the buyer is going to be taxed on that, taking away a depreciative value of their assets. But I found cases where the buyer is willing to allocate more to goodwill, which is to the benefit of the seller, in lieu of a concession on another term. So by bringing all these moving parts together and looking at them one at one, or one by one, we can very often, almost every time, come to a mutually agreeable solution. But you have to be creative and think, what is this item? We know what an asking price is, but what if we increased the down payment and minimized the seller payment? Well, if that doesn't work, what if we were to have a higher interest rate on the seller financing? Well, if that doesn't work, what if we were to put it on standby? What if we were to bring in a lender? What if we were to age the receivables? or sell the seller's term life insurance that he won't need anymore as key man because he's not owner. The more creative you can be, the better the transaction can be for everyone.
First of all, it's knowing what you want and what they want. Another piece is knowing all the players, seen and unseen, that are involved. And then it's really looking at what are all the movable parts here. What's next?
Well, throughout this entire process, it's important for the parties involved, typically a buyer and a seller, to understand that they're not going to get something without giving something. Very early in negotiations, I typically see a buyer asking a seller for a list of concessions while not offering anything in return. Well, it's not inappropriate to ask for concessions. Oftentimes, especially in this market, lenders are dictating certain terms and conditions on the term sheet. Well, typically those are to the detriment of the seller. It's more seller financing. It's for a longer period of time. It's on partial standby or full standby, meaning no principal payments or no principal or interest payments for a certain period of time. And these aren't negotiable points anymore because to get the loan, we have to subscribe to them. So it's important that in this case, the buyer appreciate if you're asking for these concessions, you're going to have to give simultaneously while you take.
I see. This ultimately gets down to sitting in front of someone, doesn't it?
Ideally, I think I think being in the same room, talking face to face, is the best way to do anything.
What's next?
Well, at this point in the game, we're running towards the finish line. There's light at the end of the tunnel, as they say. At this point, the intermediary needs to be prepared for the unexpected. Time is the enemy of all deals. The longer something goes on, the more likely things are to become unraveled. And that's not said to say rush the process so something material is not discovered and properly dealt with, but to say that people's emotions change. What they're willing to do today, they may not be willing to do tomorrow on both sides of the equation. So when we have attorney approval on a document, the material terms and conditions are mutually agreeable to those that are going to be signing it. We have a lender that has presented terms, commitment letters that's been accepted by the buyer. It's time to move forward. If we're talking about a business negotiation, of course, there's negotiations that take place at the cash register at the grocery store, and certainly those have fewer steps. But I think the key parts of win-win, as you started with, maintaining respect, never allowing a scorched earth mentality to come into play, maintaining creativity and expecting the unexpected towards the finish line, and remembering that if you're going to expect something from the other party, you need to prepare to give something back to them in a give-take scenario are the main parts and the main considerations when entering and participating in a negotiation.
What are a few of the mistakes you've seen in negotiation, and what are a few of the red flags that should alert someone to be cautious?
Well, the biggest issue that we face is realistic buyer, realistic seller, or we could say realistic participant A, realistic participant B, depending upon what the negotiation happens to be about. It's very difficult to come to any workable solution with a party that's not realistic. And realistic can be anything from, I want 3 times what the market says this item is worth, to I'm not willing to deviate from a certain term or condition that really has no material effect on the overall negotiation. That's one of the very few cases that we have a deal breaker before we ever start. Somebody that has expectations that can't be defended logically or intuitively or even understood. If somebody is unwilling to sell an item because it's an heirloom or has special value, that may be unrealistic, but at least it's understandable. If we have a party that is unrealistic and it's just it appears to be for the sake of being unrealistic, then that's obviously a big mistake and typically leads to no positive outcome.
Any red flags of while you're in the negotiation, you should consider stopping and putting it on pause?
Absolutely. In fact, some that you should stop and consider running out of the room like your hair's on fire. Typically, I see that when information that's being shared throughout the course of a negotiation or even a single conversation is in conflict with what's been said previously, whether that relates to financial performance, with in a more generic sense, representation of the item. If it's a car and the conversation starts with, it's only been driven on Sundays by my grandmother to church, and 15 minutes later you're talking about the water damage that wasn't that bad, that's a material misrepresentation. And from my experience, an individual that's willing to make a material misrepresentation once is willing to make it throughout. And that's not generally the type of person you want to be doing business with.
What do you recommend for people next to learn more about just negotiating? What's your advice? Because you've been doing this for a while. You've bought and sold several businesses yourself, and you do it now professionally. But I mean, just getting better at negotiating in general, because to me, this is a core life skill.
Well, certainly. We negotiate from the time we're born for something of importance to us. For someone who's interested in learning more about the art or the skill of negotiating, there's many resources available written. They're famous negotiators. I think experience and information can be gained from sources, from political figures, through business people, leaders of public companies. We have a lot of very experienced, skilled, almost artistic negotiators in the United States. There's books that are available, and I'm sure there's training courses and such that may be of value to some people. But I would also remind people that while negotiating is important and we do use it in our everyday life, there are certain things that you should probably find someone else to negotiate on your behalf. We see this all the time through real estate brokers, and of course, I'm going to talk about business brokers. But if you're negotiating for something that you perceive of high value, you probably want someone by your side, because negotiating for yourself is very difficult. Human nature is to become emotionally involved, and when we're emotionally involved, we make mistakes. We either offer too much or we ask too little. And having someone beside you that can negotiate in your stead is wise. To bring just one more cliche to this podcast, the famous line goes, "The lawyer who represents himself has a fool for a client." And in cases like this, having someone who's more experienced or at least emotionally impartial by your side is wise. That might be someone in your family for purchasing a car, or it very oftentimes is going to be an attorney. Attorneys are very skilled negotiators. It's what they do all day, and they negotiate on a very wide range of topics and issues, both personal and business. So don't be afraid to invest in hours of an attorney's time, because any professional advisor, be it a realtor, an attorney, an accountant, a business broker, is going to return more than their fee many times over if you've chosen one that's accomplished and skilled in their craft.
Wow. This was really helpful. Jeff, thanks so much for coming. And how could people reach you if they want to?
Our website for the business brokerage is www.enlign.com, spelled ENLIGN. Our phone number is area code 919-341-1100. And my personal email address is jsnell, J as in Sam, N as in Nancy, ELL, @enlign.com.
Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
You've been listening to Inquire Online, where unique questions inspire new answers. To learn about other shows, go to inquireonline.info.